title this morning could be Dress for Success or Read the Owner's Manual. And so I try to always bring a little bit of visual aids to help me along, but your pass-out sheet here, the only scripture it didn't have on it was the one that Paul read, which is Ephesians 6. So put Ephesians 6 at the top of the page, if you will, and then we'll go about our message for this morning, if I can keep everything straight. It's an interesting subject here, and my ultimate goal today, I try to tell you where we're going. I'd like to impress upon you the urgency and the importance of reading your Bible, okay? So, let's move through some kind of funny stuff for a while. Back in 1975, a guy named John Malloy or somebody like that, he wrote a book called Dress for Success. Now, I was a young guy out in business at that time, and I think everybody owned that book, Dress for Success. And he talked about how you should dress in different occupations. Now, I worked at Kemper Insurance, and our uniform was about what I've got on today. You had to have a suit and a white shirt. They had just relaxed it so you could have a baby blue shirt if you wanted to when I came along in '69 as an employee. But that's it, suits. No sport coats, no flashiness, you know. But I went to the home office out in Chicago, and I saw these guys walking around with tennis shoes on and blue jeans and long hair. I said, now, why do I have this model that I'm sitting in an office not going anywhere? You know, I'm behind the desk all the time. I hardly ever see the public. I got to dress like this, and they get to dress like, who are they? Who were they? The computer programmers. Don't you remember? Hey, buddy, isn't that right? Now, they could do anything they wanted to, but you could tell who the programmers were by what they had on. All right. Later on, the book came out again later, and then there was a woman's one and all that. But the purpose of that book was to give that the first impression people have of you is through their eyes. And what they see of you makes an impression on them even before you ever open your mouth. This book and its subsequent iterations of it explained what type of dress would be appropriate for different occupations. And so people kind of paid attention to it. So, based on that, what do you think the occupations of these people would be based on their wardrobes? Do you know who he is? Who is that? Chipper. What's his sport? Baseball. Boy, everybody knows that. What is his occupation? Come on, y'all got to help me. Cowboy. There you go. What about that? You know who that is? That's me, buddy. That's me in 1965. I lifeguarded. That must have been early in the summer because I don't have a dark tan, but I've lifeguarded for 2 years. Yes, sir. Now, the guy on the far right is my nephew. His name's Timothy Shada. And what is he doing? Presenting a flag to some widow whose husband had died under his service. That's a tough role, but you can tell he's a Marine by his uniform. He flew big old helicopters like those that you see. Now then you can be a contrast. That's a very serious situation versus who's on the left. That's a funny thing. So, you know, it can portray everything. Now that uniform doesn't necessarily tell you who it is, but the picture does. Who is that? Richard Petty, race car driver. There's your firemen and policemen. There's your surgeons and nurses. There's Muhammad Ali is over there on the left with someone else. And then there's a picture of what an Old Testament priest might have looked at. If you look in the Old Testament and really read about the garb, that's one person's opinion of what that would look like. So, therefore, the way we dress often gives others an instant opinion on you. Your job, based on uniforms, it might tell them what your worth is to them or your status in their eyes. So what you wear makes a difference. And I showed you these pictures of me when I was manager at Kemper Insurance in my Cadillac versus when I went out in the sprinkler system business. Believe me, how you're dressed makes a lot of difference on how people respond to you. So I think it's important and this is just physical. I haven't even got to the spiritual aspects yet. What kind of impression do we make on people who see us? I used to volunteer as a hospice chaplain. I did that for about 5 years, kind of in my spare time. And I met a guy over on Rose Lane in that nursing home behind the hospital that he had been a chef in the military as well as he owned a restaurant down in Cumberland Mall. And he told me something I'd never heard before. And it's kind of like what we've already said, but he says, the customers take their first bite with their eyes before they ever taste it. He said, you've got to have all the colors. You've got to have the brown beans and the red sauce and the green for the lettuce and all that. You got to have the colors all there. And every once in a while I'm flipping through the channels, I see one of these chef things, and it's always pretty. They're always making it pretty. I don't know what it tastes like, but they just want it to look pretty. I guess it tastes good too. I don't watch the whole shows, but it always looks pretty. What kind of impression do we make on the people around us? So let's transition to a regular household problem. What is the problem? Well, I own a weed eater, and I didn't bring that with me today, but I do have a spool of the thread that goes in there. When you run out, you got to have thread in there, right? So one day, did I do something wrong? I ran out of string. So the problem is, how much string do I want to take off of this big roll to put on my weed eater? So I go to my drawer with all my manuals in it, and I pore over it, and I knew I had to read the manual, so I went through here, and I eventually found a manual. And there it is right there. And it was 51 pages long, and I guarantee you I read everything except the Spanish part and a couple of times, and nowhere in it did it mention the length of string that I needed to put in my weed eater. Do you see what I've got circled up there? What's the word? It's a safety manual. While I took 10 feet off, I figured that'd work, and I weed eated for a while. And a few months later, I'm in my barn looking at a different stack of manuals, and all of a sudden, I found, guess what? Several months later, I keep doing something. I keep turning it off, don't I? I found the operator's manual, and it's a lot shorter, and it had the answer in there. You could put 20 feet of string in that. So I cut 20 feet off that time and stuck it there. You can do a lot more weed eating that way. Well, my notes are way over here. So here's the deal. My problem is I was looking at the wrong manual. And how do both of these situations meld together? How does God expect us to dress or appear to others? And what is our manual for accomplishing that? Isn't that a good question? When I was 13, my parents gave me this Schofield Reference Bible, which everybody had, King James, and I carried it for many years. You can tell it's pretty worn out. The leather's worn out. The little things don't even have any ends on them anymore. And I took that all the way into college with me. That was my to-go-to Bible. And my parents knew that I needed a manual for life. Now, I did not always live up to what that Bible told me, but I knew what I needed. So, what if I never read the manual? Or what if I said, it doesn't matter what the manual says, I'll just put in the amount of string that I want to? Have you ever changed the oil in your car? Just put any old oil in there. It'll all work. Or you can read the owner's manual and put the right oil in it. Isn't that right? What are we doing in our life? Personally, I was too busy to read the manual. So, what do people see when they look at you spiritually, that is? What do people know about you, spiritually speaking? In your workplace. Let me just show you this verse. It might be hard to read. I don't know. It's hard for me to read. But this is Matthew. All of these scriptures that you're going to see from now on in my message are on your little insert sheet of paper, except for Paul's Ephesians 6. So add Ephesians 6. The rest of them, you can look them up. But whosoever shall deny me before men, him will I also deny before my Father which is in heaven. If you never talk about the Lord, is that denying Him? You know, there's some tough verses in the Bible. I think at least it says you shouldn't ignore the subject of the Lord. So now let's say, what is in the Bible? Now I want you to look at this. I think you can see that okay. And you ought to jot down those statistics right here. 929 chapters in the Old Testament, 260 in the New Testament. Add that up and you get about 1189. I mean, you get 1189, not about. But in most Bibles, if I picked up this Bible and looked at the end of it, Revelation, it's probably going to have, this has 1,347 pages in it. Most Bibles have about 1,200 pages in there. So you got almost as many pages in the Bible as you do chapters. So this is important. You say, well, I'll come to church every Sunday. Does a pastor have time to cover a whole page worth or a whole chapter worth? Think of Psalm 119. You know, it's about 28 pages long or something like that. It's a big one. But if he preached one chapter every day and never missed a Sunday doing that, you'd get through the Bible in how many years does it say? 22.86 years. 23 years. Who's 23 in here? Anybody that's 23? Rachel, how old are you? Can I ask that question to a young lady? How old are you? 22. Well, you ain't quite got through the Bible yet. But let me ask you this, since you're 22. Do you remember what you heard in the service 10 years ago? Oh, wow. How many of y'all can remember, you know, it's impossible. Don't leave it to Sunday morning. Don't leave it up to your pastor to teach you the Bible. There are a lot better ways. Somewhere I got a free magazine sent to me. That happens every once in a while. You too, probably. This was a Christian magazine. I can't read the name of it up there, BibleStudyMagazine.com, but it had an article about J.I. Packard. Now, J.I. Packard is an old dude. He's in his 90s now, and it says in here that he's suffering from macular degeneration. But they're interviewing him. He wrote the book Knowing God, and many of you probably in your life have read Knowing God. If you haven't, you need to read it. But anyway, he says, and I highlighted it out of that passage, he said, in the red print, I've tried to read the whole Bible once at least every year. And I want to read the Gospels a good deal more than once a year. I do find again and again that passages come to life when I read them aloud in a way which they didn't do when I read them silently. Does that make sense? It should. You might have learned in school somewhere, if they still teach such things, that if you want to remember a particular subject or a particular something, you need to engage as many of the senses as you can. So if you sit there and you're just using your eyes, if you walk around and read it out loud, you're using your hearing, your speech, your eyes, and you will remember it a lot better. Paul made a comment. He was in a panel here not too long ago, and he said he reads his Bible, he goes to the office early and spends a half an hour or whatever it is in his devotions at work. At work? You got to be kidding. He works for the Braves. What if somebody saw him with the Bible? But it reminded me of something that I used to do when I first joined our ministry. They were over in Stone Mountain, and I had to drive 42 miles to the office. And then we moved to a different location, but it was a house. It was the youth house of a church. So it was a house next door to the church, and the youth had it. So it had this living room, which had a lot of folding chairs, most of which were pretty bent up, and it had a sofa with no legs on it. So I would go over there, get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and shower and leave home at 6:30 and drive all the way to the other side of town. And then I'd sit there in that living room before everybody else got there on that couch where you're almost sitting on the floor, and I'd read my Bible and turn around and pray in front of that couch. Interestingly enough, some years later, I'm sitting at my desk in whatever that town is, Ackworth, yes, right beside the railroad track, Bill. And I was sitting there, and the phone rings, and may I speak to the developmental officer? I said, well, I guess I'm the development officer. What can I do for you? Well, we'd like to know if you'd be interested in coming and working out as our church as the development officer. That means you're the fundraiser for you who are you familiar with that wonderful term. And I said, well, if I did take it, I would require a room with no windows with a sofa in it with no feet, no legs. And she said, excuse me? I said, that's okay. I'm not interested. But it's interesting what you can do when you take a time alone during the day to spend reading your Bible. When I was at Kemper, I went in early, worked late. My Bible reading was at night. Then later on it shifted to morning, and it still is morning now. But it doesn't matter when you read. You just need to make a goal of reading. I was with a guy named Stephen Olford and John Phillips for a week several years ago on how learning to preach and all this. And Stephen Olford was a very famous guy for a while. He's from Wales. Both of those guys were from Wales, so they spoke with a good British accent. And Stephen Olford was in his office in Memphis, and the phone rang, and his secretary came and, Stephen, I hate to disturb you, but the president is on the line. Stephen Olford said, excuse me, you tell him I'm talking to the King of Kings right now. I'll call him back in a minute. Wow. Does the president ever call me? I don't think so. What might we find in Scriptures? Now, this is interesting. We're going to look at some verses, and again, I've given you all these passages. You don't have to look them up. They're on the screen in front of you. If I remember to click right, you'll see all of these things. And it's a few different things. Some of them I would call kind of fun things. Look at this first one, Matthew 24:14, and it says, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then the end will come. Well, that tells me that this is one thing that has to happen before the end comes. Does that make sense? Well, let me tell you, there's two more verses similar to this in the Bible, and I'm not going to tell you where they are. You're going to have to read the Bible, and you'll find 2 other verses that say sort of the same thing. And they use choices. You might be able to Google the words, but it probably wouldn't work as good because I don't think they use the same, and then the end will come. I don't think it's phrased exactly like that. But that's something that you see, and then you see it again and say, wait a minute, I saw that somewhere else. Where was that? So if any Bible you pick up that I've read, it's got cross-references all over the place because I love to tie those kind of things together. So that's one. Now we already saw Ephesians 6 from Paul reading it, put on the whole armor of God, and that defines everything to guard all of our life with these spiritual things. Do we give God the glory at work? Do we seek His guidance to solve our problems, either at home or at work? Sometime you're going to be faced with a situation in your work that you really don't know the answer to. And I'll tell you what, do you go ask everybody you know in the industry? Well, what would you do if you had this scenario? Have you ever stopped, backed up, and just said, okay, Lord, this is you. I promise you got to do this, folks. I'll give you the credit for it, Lord, if you give me the answer. He may not give you the answer, but He might. We just read a passage this morning, and we're going to read another passage in Sunday school. We're going to read another passage in a few minutes that tell you better give God the glory because He don't like it when He gives you the answer and you don't give Him the glory. Do we seek His advice? Do we seek His help? I'll tell you, it's amazing. When I was at Kemper, I had a couple things that happened that, I drove a Porsche. And we were underwriting. I'm personal lines underwriter. That means I don't write Porsches with kids. I don't even like to write Porsches at all for anybody because everybody that drives a Porsche is a nut. And I drove a Porsche. But I read Car and Driver magazine. I subscribed to it. And I memorized everything that was in Car and Driver magazine. And so I decided, I'm going to list the cars, Lamborghinis and Ferraris and all, in order that I think they should be underwritten against. You don't write the ones at the top of the list, and it's okay to write the ones at the bottom of the list. And so I made me just an arbitrary list. And I even wrote to Car and Driver, one of the editors in there said, do you have any statistics that would compare these cars? And he said, no, good luck. And so I put weight to horsepower and a lot of those kind of things in there and computed it. And boy, it came out with, I said, I like that list. Well, I gave it to my manager. I said, maybe the other underwriters would like to have. They don't know sports cars from beans. I said, maybe they'd like to know how these things rank. Well, that went to the home office. It actually went to every office, 24 personal lines offices. Every office got that list. Now, was that just Allan Graham being a smart kid? I don't know that I gave the Lord any credit for it, but today I give the Lord credit for that. There's no way that my little statistics should have come out with some kind of logical list. It would have been helpful at that point if I'd have given the Lord credit for it. Well, let's see. Something else we can see. Wisdom versus foolishness. Now, I preached a message on this maybe a year or so ago. But look at these verbs. The Proverbs. A lot of verses in Proverbs cover wisdom. And it says, this one says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. Would you like to be wise? Would you like to have understanding, especially in the things that you do as a job or as raising your kids and all that? By the way, the book of Proverbs has 31 chapters. That's almost the number of days in most months. So I know my son at one point used to read Proverbs every month. He'd read one chapter a day and throw in 31 every once in a while when it didn't belong just to get it through. But he read through the book of Proverbs. You can read through the book of Proverbs in a month just by reading one chapter and a little bit every day. It's not a big task. It takes you, in most Bibles, 4 pages a day. 4 pages, that's 8 columns, to read through in a year. Just to give you a little idea what it would cost you if you decide to read through it in a year. All right, that's the good news. But now, these 2 verses, I can't get out of my mind, and I quote them to everybody I can. In Isaiah 29, in the Old Testament, this is what the Old Testament says. Wherefore the Lord said, forasmuch as this people draw near to me with their mouths, and their lips do honor me, but their heart is far from me, and their fear towards me is taught by the precept of men. Therefore, behold, I will proceed to do, I love the King James, a marvelous work among the people, even a marvelous work and a wonder. What is this wonderful thing He's going to do with these people whose lips are far from Him? Therefore, I will remove, for the wisdom of their wise men shall perish, and the understanding of their prudent men will be hidden. I shortcut that and say, if they do verse 13, I'm going to make them stupid. Do you want to be stupid? Kick God out of your life. And it's quoted again in 1 Corinthians a little bit. He said, for the preaching of the cross is to them that perish, it's foolishness. They consider it foolishness. But those of us who are being saved, it's the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and will bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. If you kick God out, you're going to be stupid. You look at some of the politicians we have today and how they're throwing out abortion like it's the thing to do. They've kicked God out first, and now they are stupid. Can I say that? So that's wisdom versus foolishness. You embrace God and put Him in your life and read His Word, and you will become wise. I don't know about smart, but you'll be wise. How about warnings? There's a warning in Ezekiel. Warning signs are there on the left in case you didn't know. Ezekiel 33. I'm going to read the whole thing. Again, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, speak to the children of thy people. Say unto them, when I bring a sword upon the land, if the people of the land take a man of their coast and find for him their watchman. Let's stop right there. He says, if y'all pick a guy and say, you're the watchman, okay, that's all it's saying so far. This guy right here is the watchman. Then here's the first scenario. If when he sees a sword coming, he sees the enemy coming, and he blows the horn, that's Buddy's job, and warns the people, then whoever hears the trumpet and doesn't take the warning, if the sword comes and kills him, his blood shall be on his own hands. If this guy says, he hears the warning and he says, I ain't going to bother. I'll just do my thing. And he gets killed, then that stupid guy is the blood's on his hand. But, look at verse 6 down there. But if the watchman sees the sword coming and doesn't blow the horn, and the people are not warned, then if the sword comes and takes any person from among him, he's taken away in his iniquity, he'll still die of his sins. But the blood I will require of the watchman's hand, because the watchman didn't do his job of blowing the trumpet. How does this apply to you and to me? Do the friends around you know the Lord? Are we the watchmen for them? We should be giving them a warning. If you don't trust the Lord and accept Him as your personal Savior, you ain't going to heaven. Please accept Him today. Have we warned? Have we been the watchman? Does this passage apply to me, Allan Graham? It goes on in verse 7, "So thou, O son of man, I have set thee as a watchman to the house of Israel. Therefore thou shalt hear the word at my mouth, and you shall warn them from me." Wow. That's tough, isn't it? You want to read your Bible? You might run into some rough stuff. Are we dressed spiritually for success? Have we read the owner's manual? Now, this next passage is going to be about 3 slides long, and if I get carried away, Jerry's going to keep up with the slides. But it starts in Acts 11, and it's like 2.5 columns in your Bible. But I'm going to read it all, and then, Jerry, I'm going to go back to the first one of it, this one here, and look at the numbers 1, 2, and 3. I'm just going to read the whole text, and then we're going to come back, and I got 9 points that I want to point out to you, okay? So I'm just going to read it, and y'all read it behind me, and we'll get there pretty soon. "And then departed Barnabas to Tarsus for to seek Saul." This is all King James, by the way. "And when he had found him, he brought him unto Antioch. And it came to pass that a whole year they assembled themselves with the church and taught much people. And the disciples were called Christians first in Antioch. And in these days came prophets from Jerusalem unto Antioch. And they stood up one of them named Agabus. And Agabus signified by the Spirit that there was going to be he was predicting the great dearth throughout the world, a famine, which came to pass in the days of Claudius Caesar. Then the disciples, every man according to his ability, determined to send relief to the brethren that dwelt in Judea, which also they did, and sent it by the hand of the elders, Barnabas and Saul. Now about that time Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex the certain of the church, and he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And because he saw that pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Then were the days of unleavened bread. And when they had apprehended him, they put him in prison and delivered him unto 4 quarterings of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people. Peter therefore was kept in prison, but prayer was made without ceasing of the church of God for him. And when Herod had brought him forth the same night, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers. I don't know what that quarterings means. I don't know whether that's 4, 16 guards or exactly. I ought to look that into modern translation. But anyway, he's between 2 churches, bound with 2 chains, and the keepers before the door kept the prison. And behold, the angel of the Lord came upon him and shined a light in prison. And he smote Peter on the side and raised him up quickly, and his chains fell off from his hands. You did take care of me, didn't you? Thank you very much. And the angel said unto him, Gird yourself and bind on thy sandals. And so he did. And he said unto them, Cast thy garment about thee and follow me. And he went out and followed them, and wist not that there was true done by the angel, but thought he a vision. When they were past the first and the second ward, they came unto the iron gate leading unto the city, which opened to them of its own accord. And they went out and passed through one street, and forthwith the angel departed from him then. And when Peter came to himself, he said, Wow, I know of a certainty that the Lord has sent his angels and delivered me out of the hand of Herod and from all the expectation of the people of the Jews. And when he considered the thing, he came to the house of Mary, the mother of John, surname of Mark, and there were many people gathered there praying for him. And as Peter knocked on the door of the gate, a damsel came to hearken named Rhoda. And when she heard Peter's voice, she opened the gate for gladness. But she opened not the gate, but she ran in and told Peter, Hey, Peter's out there. And they said, Oh, you're crazy. But she constantly affirmed that she was telling the truth. Then they and his angels. But Peter continued knocking, and when they opened the door, they saw, and they were astonished. But he, beckoning unto them with his hand to hold the peace, declared to them how the Lord had brought him out of prison. He gave God the credit. Remember this? At work, give God the credit. He got the credit. Go show these things unto James and the brethren. He departed and went in another place, and now there was no small stir among the soldiers, what had become of Peter. And when Herod had sought for him and found him not, he examined the keepers and commanded that they should be put to death, because they let him get away. And he went down from Judea to Caesarea, and there abode. Herod was highly displeased with them of Tyre and Sidon, but they came with one accord to him, and having made Blastus the king's chamberlain their friend, desired peace, because their country was nourished by the king's country. And upon a set day, Herod arrayed a royal apparel, sat upon his throne, and made an oration unto them. And the people gave a shout, saying, It is like the voice of a God, and not of a man. And immediately the angel of the Lord smote him, because he gave not God the glory. And he was eaten of worms, and gave up the ghost. But the word of God grew and multiplied. And Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem when they had fulfilled their ministry, and took them unto them John, whose name was Mark. That has 9 different subjects in it, folks. You can't read a secular book and get that much diversity in a couple of chapters. I'm telling you, let's go back and look. First of all, number 1. Did you get there? Yep, he's there. Thank you, Jerry. Jerry's looking after me very well. They were there for 1 year. You mean they weren't in that pulpit forever? No, they were there for 1 year. Who was left behind when they left? Who did all the teaching? The elders. Remember, they went everywhere appointing elders. Elders were the in-chargees. And they were first called Christians at Antioch. If you didn't know that, that's just something interesting fact. Now we got Agabus underlined. Agabus was the giver. He stood up and he said, hey, I think we need to take a collection, because all these people are going to... He was also a predictor of what was going to happen. And it says, every man, according to his ability, to turn to send relief. Every man. Have we ever had an offering in this church where every person participated in it? I don't know. Maybe we have. But if you haven't participated sometimes, you always say, why not? In fact, let me give you a suggestion. I'll be Agabus for a moment. I just said that Michael and them going over to Romania, didn't I? And you know that's not a cheap flight, first of all, especially for the 3 of them. And you know they've had a little difficulty with their son medically. And, you know, you just might think of helping them out. We have people in the congregation that we know that are in need of some finances. Just in general. Let me phrase it this way. Go home, and should this afternoon the Lord remind you of what I'm just now saying, then don't think it's because of what Allan Graham said. Give yourself enough space so you're not still ruminating on anything that you heard from me. And all of a sudden, you're in the middle of the night. This happens to me all the time. It did the other night. I had some excellent points to put in here, and I woke up and forgot to write them down. Now I can't remember what they were. I think the Lord gave me some good points that y'all didn't get, because I didn't get up and write them down. If the Lord wakes you up in the middle of the night, ask Him, well, who and how much? Yeah, he's a detailed guy. And if you say, well, I don't know if he needs it or not. A lady came up to Francine at a different church one time, and she said, here's a check for $500. And Francine says, well, this is when we were dead broke in the sprinkler system business. Francine said, we don't need that money, and we didn't. And she said, are you proud? Francine said, I don't think so. She said, well, the Lord told me to give you this, so you take it. And Francine said, okay, because you said the Lord told you to give it to me. We don't need it. The next week, our refrigerator went on the blink. You see, the Lord knows what people need, even when they don't know what they need. The Lord knows a lot about us, more than we know. Oh, my goodness, what a deal. Go down to the next slide. He killed James. And I have a if-then statement that we learned in, I don't know what kind of if-then, what was that, calculus or I don't know, geometry or something. If this happens, then this happens. this is an if-then statement. If the last slide, which was chapter 11, the end of chapter 11, if you act like Christians, then this is the then. This is what happens. The world is going to hate you. And so they killed James. Now, he saved Peter. Why did he save Peter and let James get killed? I don't know. I'm not the Lord. But if somebody gets killed, it doesn't mean the Lord forsook them. It means he had a reason for that too. So you're not always, if you're a Christian doing what you're right, everything should run smoothly. That's not biblical. So fourth is, you may get killed. 6, he was between two soldiers, and the chains down in number 5, it says they fell off of his hands. Now, he didn't know that then, but they were praying back over at the ranch. You know, prayers affect things that your praying people do not know what's happening, but over here, with the answer was over here as they were breaking. And you know, I've thought about this a lot, just in putting this message together. And I'm saying, why were the guards, I know I'm skipping a little bit, why was Herod so upset about this, and why did he kill the guards? And I'm thinking, maybe the shackles were never opened. If the shackles had been open, he might have said, "Who let y'all out?" But if the shackles were still shut, you remember Jesus walked through walls, didn't he? Once he had risen, could he not make Peter be able to just walk out? It says the doors opened, the shackles fell off. It doesn't say whether they're open or not, but it's just worthy of consideration. What did they see that made him so mad that he was wanting to kill them? Anyway, they put God's name on the line and prayed. God can do anything, depends on what he wants to do. Now, next one, 6. Christians can be spared. So some of them were killed, but the steel at least was very weak that fell off, that was at least weak in God's hands. And Peter is empowered and comes down here. And obviously, in verse 18, it says, there was no small stir among the soldiers when they heard about what happened in Peter. I'll tell you. And he commanded the keepers of the jail, to be put to death. What a shame. The world does not understand. And Herod was displeased with them retired. Verse 20, I put this government as usual. Herod thought he was a wonderful guy. And they said, it's the voice of God. And immediately he died. And he was eaten of worms. Was he eaten of worms right in front of everybody? That would be an awful sight. And it doesn't say that Herod said anything. All he did was accept the praise. Yes, I am great. You see what I mean? Be willing to give the Lord the credit. And I think number 9 is the word grew and multiplied. I think seeing God at work in the church causes the church to grow. I really miss the days that I've mentioned before of the Wednesday night prayer meetings in which we had testimonies. And a lot of times testimonies were given in the Sunday night services. And to hear testimonies from people in the congregation about what's going on encourages everybody. One more time. What are we missing if we've never read the whole Bible? Do we have all the answers without reading the whole Bible? I thought about this years ago. There's a verse that says the sincere milk of the word, and that's not what's recorded here, but we have a baby bottles versus the food that I had pictured earlier. What's the difference between the two? Yeah, a nurse can tell me that. What's the difference? Anybody? What's the baby bottles for? Infants that what can't they do? They can't feed themselves. I claim this. When you come to church on Sunday morning, guess what? Somebody's popping the lid off and sticking a bottle in your mouth and feeding you. Is that right? When you go home and open that Bible and dig for yourself, you're going to get to the meat of it. I know I'm stretching it, but you understand my thought. We're going to be late anyway, aren't we? This, I think, to me, is one of the most important verses in the Bible. And I used it when I was preaching the installation of Tico, my good buddy down at Guatemala, when he was commissioned in as the new president of the seminary down there. And I had 3 points, and this was my last point. And I think it's a wonderful verse. So this is Moses' last words. There's some more chapters, but he put some blessings on everybody. But he had just spoken. Deuteronomy is a big book, and this is all a quote from Moses. And he finally gets to this point, and it says, "And Moses came and spoke all the words of this song in the ears of the people, he and Joshua the son of Nun. And Moses finished speaking all those words to all of Israel, and he said unto them, Set your hearts upon all the words which I testify among you this day, which ye shall command your children to observe to do, all the words of this law. For it is not a vain thing for you, because it is your life. And through this thing ye shall prolong your days in the land which ye go over the Jordan to possess it." I put this design on my arm one time. I was in Ecuador at Mitad del Mundo. That's a big thing. It says the middle of the world, and it's on the equator. And I met Steve Saint. Jerry Carnell's my friend, and he introduced me to Steve Saint right there. And Steve Saint had this on both arms. And he said he just had a group down there to be with the Waorani people in their tribe. And if you want to know more of that story, I'll tell you later. But anyway, one of the people on that team was a dentist from somewhere up north, I don't know where. But he had had this put on his arms by the Indians there in the Waorani tribe. And when he came and landed in Miami, he got something at McDonald's or whatever in the airport and went and sat down at a table, and some guy walked over to him and he said, "What? That's an unusual tattoo. What is that tattoo?" And he presented the gospel to the guy and led the guy to the Lord. And then he goes home to his wife and he said, "Look, let's go out to McDonald's or something. I want to show you how this worked down in Miami." So they took the family out and they sit at one table. He sat by himself at another table, and somebody came up and said, "That's a funny tattoo you got on. What does this mean?" And he told them the story of the Alca Indians killing the 4 guys and how they'd come to know the Lord. And that guy came to know the Lord, the guy he was witnessing to. He went out the next day to a tattoo parlor and said, "I want you to tattoo these on my arms forever because it's a great witness for the Lord." That's a little different dress for success, isn't it? What would you do? Wow. There's a verse that I quote, and if I give you one of our books, Letting the Lord Provide, I usually sign it and I put this verse on there, and this is it's not in your book, is it? 2 Chronicles 16:9. This is what it says. The eyes of the Lord, remember, eyes first. The eyes of the Lord runs to and fro throughout the whole earth, seeking through whom he may prove himself strong. The eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth, seeking him through whom he may prove himself strong. He's looking for you. we used to have a choir up here, and I sat back there, and Francine sat up here, and our daughter would sit up there in the balcony sometimes, and she'd be misbehaving, and Francine would go, and we'd get home, and Sherry would say, Mama, you got to quit doing that. Everybody in the audience knows that you're at me up there, and that's not fair. I said, well, then quit goofing off up there. When Francine goes, what difference does it make to Sherry? What condition has to be there for it to impact Sherry at all? She has to be looking at her mom. The eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout, seeking through him through whom he may prove himself strong. He's looking for you. The question is, are our eyes focused on him? The closing song in 1 minute is Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus. And I encourage you to read the manual. It's got things in there that will blow your mind, and it'll change your life.